DeepSeek is a Chinese AI company that develops large language models, which is a type of AI program that can recognize and generate text among other tasks. Its new model, R1, is said to rival the capabilities of leading models, while reportedly costing less to develop. How does DeepSeek's models differ from the ones that came before? Can these be used safely in a corporate environment? How can LLMs be developed and used ethically? I'm Patricia Mirasol, a multimedia producer at BusinessWorld. In this episode, I discuss these topics with Satnam Narang, a senior staff research engineer at Tenable Inc, a cybersecurity company. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Narang. Now let's go straight to the meat of the matter. Talking about DeepSeek, how do their LLMs differ from those models that came before?
But what it really did was it sort of, turned the concept of large language models, LLMs. It turned it on its head a little bit because, we're traditionally used to like Gemini from Google. OpenAI has various models. OpenAI is like pioneering a lot of some of the more frontier models. Gemini also just had a frontier model released as well too. So DeepSeek released something called DeepSeek R1, which is on par with those frontier models. But where it differs is it doesn't have to be run only in the cloud on the DeepSeek servers. You can download a copy of it locally on your machine. Granted, it requires a little bit more hardware in order to run in some of the like larger capacities, but there are other flavors of it. So it's sort of like, if you were to imagine it like getting some ice cream, right? You can get 1 scoop, 2 scoops. This model, like the flagship model for DeepSeek, it's like 671 billion scoops of ice cream if you were to compare it like that. So it has capacity to do a lot more, on par with some of these frontier models. So being released as something that you can run yourself is a pretty significant achievement. The other factor too is that they were able to develop this allegedly using less powerful hardware than say the other companies have because of export control laws. So that's really what sort of changed the game when it came out last month.
How was DeepSeek able to do a lot more with a lot less? Was it purely because of the laws on export control? Did these laws force them to become innovative?
Absolutely, yeah. When you don't have access to the premier flagship hardware, you're going to have to make do with what you do have. And allegedly, they were able to use that hardware. But I mean, there's reports that they also use some other techniques where they utilize some of these frontier models like OpenAI to sort of help train their own models. And so there's people speculating that that's also how they were able to build something so powerful through some techniques that they had implemented on their end. So it's a combination of things.
What are the practical use cases of R1? Like, for example, in sectors like healthcare or finance?
The thing with DeepSeek R1 is, I guess, one of the things that it is known for is it has a technique that it uses called chain of thought, where it will take your prompt and it will show the user how it's thinking through answering your prompt. As it'll walk through the process. It's using reasoning to kind of figure out, well, it says, okay, Patricia wants to know, how to cook a pizza, right? Okay, how can I explain it to Patricia? I'm distilling it down to something very minimal like pizza, but and it walks through, okay, well, I should probably talk about the ingredients you need to purchase, how long you should, bake it for, what the instructions are for each step of placing the ingredients on top of the pizza, things like that. So it basically walks through the process and then it'll present you with its plan, like after it thinks it through. So one of the key elements of DeepSeek R1 is that it's able to do a lot more with a lot less. So especially like in applications for coding, it can also be utilized for improving coding or basically just reasoning through problems that you might encounter. Like if you're trying to solve for an issue within your organization, it can do that. So what it does is it knows, okay, if you're asking a question about mathematics, it will refer to that expert. So it basically utilizes less intensive memory operations because it's not having to go through everything. It's able to seek out specifically what it's looking for. I guess it's kind of in the name, DeepSeek.
But is it also prone to hallucinations?
hallucinations are commonplace with generative AI tools. I think that's why, there's this rush to get to, artificial general intelligence or AGI, being able to be on par with like human thought. We're not there yet. Obviously, there's all these companies who are working to get to that point, but it's gonna make mistakes. It's gonna hallucinate. It also relies on how you prompt it. So if you prompt it in a certain way, you can kind of narrow its focus to try to give you the answer that you want. But if you speak in more general or broader terms, it's gonna basically try to guess what you're looking for, but it's not gonna know for sure what exactly it is you're looking for.
Shifting a bit to cybersecurity, how can businesses protect their data when using DeepSeek in a corporate environment?
So there's two different ways of approaching it, Patricia. The first way is if you're looking at it from running it locally. Obviously, if you run it locally on your own hardware that you control, it gives you a little bit more control, like literally control over it. Says, this is the model that I'm running, assuming you obtained it from a legitimate source. Cyber criminals might try to claim to offer versions of DeepSeek that you can download on your computer that could contain malware, for example. So clearly you want to get it from the source itself, or a trusted source. Another aspect to think about is DeepSeek offers a website and mobile applications that you can use to interface with DeepSeek if you don't want to download it onto your machine. So the problem with that is your data is being stored on servers in China, and therefore you're sort of having to go by the laws of China. So Chinese laws are what are going to govern the data that you share with DeepSeek. So if you live in a country that has really strong privacy protections, those protections won't necessarily protect you because you're interacting with a service that's hosted in China, and it's going to be governed by Chinese law. So companies that want to use DeepSeek should clearly not use the DeepSeek website or mobile applications without understanding the risks of doing so. So if you do plan on using it, running it locally is going to be more optimal, because if you don't want your data to be, seen by Chinese authorities or anybody else, you have to be very careful with that.
South Korea has recently banned new downloads of DeepSeek. Does Tenable think that DeepSeek should be banned, or at least used with caution?
I think with any service you use, you have to use it with caution. I mean, the thing is sort of the Pandora's box has been opened, right? We have DeepSeek here. It's accessible. You can run it locally on laptops, whether it's a personal device or a company device. Clearly, you have to implement security solutions and safeguards to block access to it on company devices, or if you're a government devices. I think we're just going to continue to see more and more of these LLMs spring up. I know that Alibaba just released one as well, not too long after DeepSeek. I think it was Qwen 2.5. I've seen others that have popped up. I don't remember the names off the top of my head, but I know it's basically it's a race, right? You have a lot of people wanting to iterate, develop, and take the lead when it comes to the development of these large language models, especially open source ones like DeepSeek. But they also have to compete with the more established players like Google's Gemini. OpenAI has various models, O1, O3. Meta has Llama. That one you can also download locally. I know Twitter or X also just announced Grok 3. So there's so many of them out there, it's hard to keep up with for even myself.
You mentioned in an email that was sent to me that AI is a free-for-all race. So if this is a race, how can smaller countries like the Philippines hope to compete in it?
Well, I mean, don't let the race pass you by. Obviously you want to have some, have a foot in this race. You do want to, utilize this technology because it's here. We can't turn a blind eye to it and pretend that it doesn't exist, because it's here and it's going to have broad-reaching impacts for countries, governments across the world. One of the concerns I have personally and have had over the last few years is the type of job displacement we're going to see as a result of the iterations of large language models, because they're going to get to a point where they're so useful that organizations will utilize them in place of certain employees or positions, and those jobs will get eliminated, which will then leave those people out of work. And so we have to think about the broader ramifications from an economic standpoint of what do these people who have had steady jobs going to do when their jobs are displaced by AI tools. It's not happening tomorrow per se, but we can already see the writing is on the wall. It's going to happen, and it's about governments around the world also preparing for this and figuring out how best to handle that. We'll have to see what the paradigm shift happens when AI becomes more closer to AGI.
AGI to me sounds both fascinating and terrifying. I also don't know what will happen then. Okay, so how can AI models be developed and used ethically?
Developing a model, it takes work. Obviously, it's trained on the data that, it's provided. So, I mean, one of the things I will say about DeepSeek is, one of the challenges, I should say, is that its guardrails are not as robust as some of the other existing models out there. Like, you can get it to do things that it shouldn't do. You can ask it to do things and provide you with guidance on how to do things that I don't even want to repeat here verbally, because it worries me that people could do that. But, that's the challenge with, certain LLMs, right? If they're not properly developed in a way that safeguards from this information, it will help people do some very bad things. We will see cyber criminal usage of this too. I know we kind of touched upon it earlier. There are existing cyber criminal based LLMs out there, like Worm GPT, Fraud GPT, and Ghost GPT, for example. These are created by cyber criminals for cyber criminals, but they require you to pay up a certain amount of money to access those services. With DeepSeek, cyber criminals don't have to pay for it. They can figure out how to develop the correct prompts to ask DeepSeek to provide it with tips on how to craft convincing phishing emails, or developing profiles for dating apps to scam users, or write malware or ransomware. So it's capable of doing that. And, if you try to do that with some of the existing models, there's guardrails in place to try to stop you from it. That doesn't mean that someone who's very good at prompt engineering couldn't try to figure out a way to convince some of these existing models to do it. But they also have other safeguards where they might flag it as a policy violation. And if you continuously ask it for that, they may ban your account or ban your access to it. But with a local language model, large language model like DeepSeek, there's no recourse for blocking or banning access to it. So that's another area of concern that I have.
But do we have any recourse against these? I mean, what do we have now that can help fight against that?
Well, I mean, when it comes to the local large language models, there's not a whole lot that can be done, because they're, self-contained within a system. So they're, accessible on a machine somewhere, and it's based on how the model was developed and ultimately how strong the model is at defending against attempts to try to, provide this information that it should not provide. So we're basically relying on its own internal controls. But when it comes to the large language models, having security controls in place to prevent access from your employees from downloading it, unsanctioned usage of it, only allowing approved usage of certain, let's say, certain models you do trust and you do want to allow your employees to develop on because you've thoroughly tested and vetted certain large language models. That's pretty much the way to go. But if your employees are going and using these on their own personal devices, there's really nothing you can do.
DeepSeek's R1 is on par with frontier models. It also requires less memory operations by seeking out the specific expert information a user needs. One of its challenges, however, is that its guardrails are not as robust as some other models. Companies, Mr. Narang said, can have security controls at work to prevent their employees from downloading it. This has been another episode of B-Side. Subscribe now and enjoy industry insights on Philippine business and beyond.